Welcome back, everyone, to the Wedge 52 Gridiron podcast. I'm your host, Wedge. Today's episode will be the Ravens Week 11 recap. The Ravens took down the Bengals on Thursday Night Football, 34-20. Before we jump in, please make sure you press that follow button right here on Spotify, as well as check out the Instagram at Wedge 52 Gridiron. Follow there, share this podcast, share the Instagram with your fellow Baltimore Ravens and NFL fans. And let's jump into today's episode. Last week, Week 11, the Ravens took down the Bengals divisional opponent 34-20. My offensive player of the week has got to go to Gus Edwards. He had 12 carries for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns on the night, as well as 2 catches for 8 yards. Gus Edwards has really been stepping up, in showing yet again that he can be a dominant force in that backfield. The unfortunate injury to J.K. Dobbins early in the season for the Ravens has, allotted Gus Edwards to be that primary tailback for the Ravens. And he has been putting up very solid numbers so far. 564 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground so far this season. So Gus Edwards earning himself another offensive player of the week for me. And then this week's defensive player of the week for the Baltimore Ravens goes to Patrick Queen, who led the team with 11 tackles on the night in the big win over the Cincinnati Bengals. A couple of other stat lines from that Thursday night football action. Lamar Jackson, 16 for 26, 264 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions, as well as 9 rushes for 54 yards. Odell Beckham Jr., had his first 100-plus yard game as a Baltimore Raven with 4 catches and 116 yards. Very good day from him, showing a lot of shiftiness, getting open, catching the ball on a short routes and making a couple moves, getting some yards after catch, as well as, burning a defender, and making that deep catch for the 51-yard gain, as well as making some moves after that, as well as another one where he got behind the defense and Lamar overthrew him by, less than a yard. So definitely exciting to see that Lamar and Odell connection really start to pick up here as this season rolls on, as, they get more and more comfortable with each other. And as it becomes, more necessity for that offense to be clicking in as many ways as possible. The Lamar and Odell connection got a whole lot more important after some very brutal news during that Cincinnati Bengals game, which I'll talk about in a minute. Nelson Aguilar had 1 catch for 37 yards and a front-flipping touchdown for the Baltimore Ravens. And then Rashad Bateman caught himself a 10-yard touchdown pass as well. Over on the defensive side, Roquan Smith had 10 tackles, and then we had 5 sacks on the night, 1 by Madubuike, 1 by Owe, 1 by Robinson, 1 by Van Noy, and 1 by Clowney. So a good collaborative effort by that defense on Thursday night, as well as holding that Cincinnati offense to just 2 for 11 on third down conversions. Part of that was because quarterback Joe Burrow did leave the game with an injury. Before that, he went 11 for 17. 101 yards, 1 passing touchdown, and no interceptions. He did leave the game with a wrist injury. It is later reported that injury is going to be season-ending for Joe Burrow, which looks to, I mentioned it in my previous Ravens recap episode, how critical this one was going to be for the Bengals in terms of their divisional and playoff hopes. That was with Joe Burrow still healthy if they lost, losing that and going that far deep in the AFC North divisional race at this moment, as well as losing their starting quarterback. It good as wraps up the Cincinnati Bengals season in terms of their playoff chances. Jamar Chase on the night, 2 catches for just 12 yards and a touchdown with a minute or so left from quarterback Jake Browning, who came in for Burrow. And then Joe Mixon was kind of the only high point for that Bengals offense there. 16 carries for 69 yards, as well as 5 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown on the night. In other news, for the Baltimore Ravens, tight end Mark Andrews did have an ankle injury early in that game. I think he had 2 catches for 20-something yards. Prior to that, did get that ankle injury. It appears to be serious enough to hold him out for most likely the rest of the season. Right now, it's looking like an 8 to 12 week injury. The AFC Conference Championship game, if the Ravens make it that far, is 9 weeks from, this playing week. So, definitely done for the regular season. If the Ravens make a deep playoff chance, it's seeming like a 50-50 shot on Mark Andrews coming back into play. The injury that he's dealing with is very similar fashion, obviously a little bit more severe than last year's Patrick Mahomes injury that he suffered during the playoffs, and he was still able to play through that, and then get proper treatment and rest after the season. He obviously, I don't think, missed, a ton of time, if any, starts with that injury, and, played, hobbled through the Super Bowl and won it. So if the Ravens make it that far, expect, a 60 to 70% healthy Mark Andrews. I would still take over, most tight ends in this league. So prayers up to Mark Andrews. Definitely going to be a big part of the offense that, will be missing for that Baltimore Ravens team that has started to really click under Coach Monken's, system, as he's learning the players, as he's learning how the players execute the schemes that he's trying to do. The offense has been looking very nice, scoring 34 against the Bengals last week, scoring 38 and 30-something against the Seahawks and the Lions, putting up good numbers, definitely up there in points per game now at 5th in the league. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of combat that injury and how they proceed from there. I expect, that's why I was mentioning Odell Beckham Jr., that connection growing. In terms of backup tight ends, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, maybe Vonderak looked solid in preseason. Maybe he gets some action. We'll see how, it develops there. But definitely expect a little bit more of a dosage from, Odell, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Aguilar, even Duvernay, who hasn't been getting a ton of reps at the wide receiver position. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see, some Patrick Ricard usage out of that tight end slot type of role, especially in some short yardage, passing situations, things like that. Definitely a brutal loss for that Baltimore Ravens offense and the team as a whole. But Baltimore Ravens can still be scary without him. Just got to adapt and find a way to make it down the stretch. Maybe Mark Andrews comes back for a playoff run when we need him most. We will see. The Baltimore Ravens' next opponent is the Los Angeles Chargers. They lost this week. Week 11, they lost to the Green Bay Packers 23-20. Not too surprising, but a little bit of a shocker. Chargers offense has been playing very, very well this season. Their defense has been struggling mightily, which has led to them having a very poor record. Almost, I would say, out of the playoff race already at this point. Definitely can get hot and, get right back in that. But as of right now, on the outside looking in terms of that game, back and forth the whole game between the Packers and the Chargers. Not really a clear cut, hey, this is what happened, or this is, what didn't happen for either team. Joey Bosa did get injured, so I would not expect him to play against Baltimore. It looked very serious based on his reaction. I've not read any, injury reports in terms of Bosa's status. I would expect it to be, at least an IR-worthy injury based on how he was reacting. A couple of stats from that. Justin Herbert, 21 for 36, 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no picks, as well as 8 rushes for 73 yards on the day. And then his number one target, Keenan Allen, 10 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown. And then on the defensive side, Khalil Mack had himself a day with 8 tackles and 2 sacks on the loss to Green Bay. In terms of that offense, the two biggest guys, going to be Herbert and Allen, just like in this Packers matchup. So far on the season, Justin Herbert, just over 2,600 passing yards, 19 passing touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions on the season. And then Keenan Allen, 83 catches for 1,011 receiving yards already, as well as 7 touchdowns on the season. So those are, their two main contributors in terms of that offensive success, and them performing pretty well and definitely above average so far this season. Before we look into some more stats, versus team stats there in this matchup, just a quick look at the Ravens division standings. Ravens currently sit at the top at 8-3. The Browns, beating the Steelers, sit at 7-3, while the Steelers 6-4, and the Bengals now 5-5 with a poor divisional record and a backup quarterback. The Browns also Deshaun Watson dealing with a season-ending injury as well. So things are looking positive for that Ravens divisional hopes. Winning the division and hoping for that. But Ravens still have to keep their head on straight and not make mistakes that are going to beat themselves. So moving into our next matchup, in terms of the Ravens offensive ranks so far this season, that Ravens offense is 7th in yards per game at 380.5, first in rushing yards per game at 155.1, 5th in points, like I said, at 27.6, and 5th in third down success percentage at 44%, which is very, very solid for that, Baltimore Ravens offense there. In terms of that Chargers offense, like I said, pretty solid. 12th in yards per game at 371, 17th in rush yards per game at 105, meaning that majority of their yards, 270-ish on average, are coming, through the air, through Justin Herbert there. 8th in points per game at 25.9, and 9th in third down completions at 43.2%, third down success rate. On defense, though, is where these two teams really set themselves apart in terms of team stats. Ravens defense in yards allowed 305. That's third best in the league. Third best in pass yards at 169.7. Third best in points at just 16.1. And sixth best in third down success allowed at 35.2%. On the flip side of that, the Chargers defense, despite having quite a few good pieces on that defensive side of the ball, struggling mightily in terms of putting it all together. 32nd in yards allowed per game at 418 yards per game allowed. 32nd in pass yards allowed at 291.6. So you can see, despite the pressure from Khalil Mack, who is towards the top of the league in sacks so far this season, and then Bosa obviously was on the other side of Mack majority of the time. Still, that secondary still struggling to cover guys, allowing 291 passing yards per game, 23rd in points allowed per game at 23.8, as well as decently, in terms of the rest of their defense, where they do succeed is on third down, at 8th best in the league at 35.7% success rate of getting their opponents off the field, or at least forced into a fourth down. And so that's kind of a look into, team stats for both of these teams as they head into this next week's matchup, which is another primetime matchup for the Baltimore Ravens. This one's taking place in Los Angeles on Sunday Night Football. Should be a good one. My Ravens' keys to success for the Ravens to increase their chances of beating these Los Angeles Chargers in Week 12. Number one is the offense needs to be clicking. What does this mean? This means, finding ways to, navigate the offense without Mark Andrews, as well as, getting everyone involved, making sure not only can we throw the ball, not only can we run the ball, but making sure everything is moving fluidly and not, putting ourselves in a hole or not wasting our own possessions because of things like dropped passes or things like turnovers, whether it be fumbles. Knock on wood, we've been pretty solid at not fumbling the ball the past couple of weeks, or interceptions by our offense, things created by our offense that are going to help a very poor Los Angeles Chargers defense stay in the game, where Herbert and Allen can have a chance at, making some points, making a opportunity for their team to win. That leads me into the second key point, is going to be that Ravens defense standing strong, especially in the likes of Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. The Baltimore Ravens have been doing a very, very good job defensively so far, especially, with that wide receiver position, in terms of not allowing a wide receiver to have a massive game. We played Jamar Chase just last Thursday, only 12 yards for him. We played Amon-Ra, who had a good amount of yards. I don't believe he found the end zone. No, he didn't. DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett, those guys didn't find the end zone. So they've been playing solid. Amari Cooper, they held in check. Defensive backs have been playing solid. We definitely need that again from them this week. And then Marlon Humphrey's status on that defensive back side is questionable. I believe he's dealing with a calf injury. We'll see if he's able to go this week. But Ravens defense played very solid last week against Cincinnati without Marlowe. And then the third, key part is going to be executing on third down. This is, speaking offensively. This is going to be, interesting to kind of see how Coach Monken's play calling shifts. A lot of his third down, schemes or play calls were developed and ran kind of through Mark Andrews. Obviously, we're going to be without Mark Andrews. So not only is that important to find success away from Mark Andrews on third down, where he's been a very big part of our third down success, not only this season, but throughout Lamar and Mark Andrews' careers, but as well as kind of trying to exploit that one part of the Chargers defense that actually is solid, 8th in the league on that, although they struggle in many other defensive team statistics. So exploiting that, as well as trying to find, opportunities and things that work without our, elite tight end Mark Andrews in the lineup for this Sunday night football game against those Los Angeles Chargers. That's all I have for today's episode of the Wedge 52 Gridiron Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Please make sure you press that follow button right here on Spotify, as well as share with your fellow NFL and Baltimore Ravens fans. Thank you all for listening once again, and go Ravens.